October 21st, 1879. Menlo Park, New Jersey. A small glass bulb sat on Thomas Edison's workbench, glowing with a warm, steady light. Inside, a carbonized cotton thread, a filament thinner than a human hair, burned white-hot without burning out. For 13 hours, the bulb glowed. Then 14, then 15. Edison watched through the night, hardly daring to breathe. At 40 hours, the filament finally failed, crumbling to ash. But it didn't matter. Edison had done it. He had created light that didn't flicker, light that didn't smoke, light that could be turned on and off with a simple switch. For the first time in human history, artificial light could rival the sun itself. The age of fire was ending. The age of electricity had begun. But this moment, this single glowing bulb in a New Jersey laboratory, was the end of one story and the beginning of another. Behind Edison's triumph lay decades of failed experiments, shattered glass, and burned-out filaments. Ahead lay a war that would determine not just who controlled light, but who controlled the future of human civilization. A war between two brilliant minds, two competing visions, two incompatible systems. A war fought not with weapons, but with wires, generators, and the raw power of electricity itself. This is the story of how humanity conquered darkness. But it's also the story of how that conquest nearly tore the world apart. Before Edison's bulb glowed in 1879, the world after sunset belonged to shadows. Cities were dark, dangerous places. Streets were lit sporadically by gas lamps that cast weak, flickering light. Homes relied on candles, oil lamps, and fireplaces. Work stopped when daylight faded. Factories closed. Offices emptied. Life compressed into the daylight hours, and humanity surrendered each night to darkness. This wasn't romantic. It was limiting. Darkness meant danger. Crime flourished in unlit streets. It meant inefficiency. Productivity dropped to zero after sunset. It meant isolation. Social life contracted to small circles around hearths and lamps. Humanity had mastered fire thousands of years earlier, but fire was a poor substitute for daylight. It flickered. It smoked. It consumed fuel constantly. And it was dangerous, causing devastating fires that destroyed entire cities. Gas lighting, introduced in the early 1800s, improved the situation but only marginally. Gas lamps were brighter and more reliable than candles, but they still flickered. They still produced heat and consumed oxygen, making enclosed spaces stuffy and uncomfortable. They required complex infrastructure, pipes running throughout buildings, connections to central gas works, constant maintenance. And they were still dangerous. Gas leaks caused explosions. Faulty lamps started fires. By the mid-1800s, scientists knew that electricity could produce light. Arc lamps, devices that created brilliant light by sparking electricity between carbon rods, had been demonstrated as early as 1809. But arc lamps were impractical for most uses. They were blindingly bright, suitable for lighthouses and large public spaces, but far too intense for homes and offices. They required high voltages and constant adjustment as the carbon rods burned away. And they were expensive to operate. What the world needed was electric lighting that was steady, controllable, affordable, and safe. It needed incandescent lighting, light produced by heating a material until it glowed. The concept was simple. Pass electric current through a thin wire or filament. Electrical resistance causes the filament to heat up. At high enough temperatures, it glows, producing light. The challenge was finding a filament that would glow brightly without burning out immediately. Dozens of inventors across Europe and America worked on this problem through the 1860s and 1870s. The technical obstacles were daunting. Filaments needed to reach temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius to produce useful light. At those temperatures, most materials oxidized instantly, burning away in seconds. Filaments also needed to withstand thermal stress, heating and cooling repeatedly without cracking or breaking. If you're fascinated by the forgotten battles and brilliant minds that electrified our world, subscribe to Retro Files and discover the experiments that transformed darkness into light. Early experimenters tried platinum filaments sealed in vacuum bulbs. Platinum could withstand high temperatures without oxidizing. But platinum was expensive, and even in vacuum, platinum filaments gradually evaporated, darkening the bulb and eventually breaking. Other inventors tried carbon filaments. Carbon could reach extremely high temperatures and was cheap. But carbon oxidized even faster than platinum unless sealed in near-perfect vacuum, which was extremely difficult to achieve with 19th-century technology. Joseph Swan, a British physicist and chemist, came closest to success before Edison. Swan had been experimenting with incandescent bulbs since the 1850s. By 1878, he had developed carbon filaments and improved vacuum pumps that could create better vacuums inside glass bulbs. Swan demonstrated working incandescent bulbs in early 1879, months before Edison's success. His bulbs worked, but were imperfect. They didn't last long, a few hours at most, and they required carefully controlled conditions. Thomas Edison approached the problem with characteristic intensity. Edison was not primarily an inventor, but an innovator, someone who took existing ideas and improved them until they became practical and commercially viable. He understood that inventing a working incandescent bulb wasn't enough. The bulb needed to be reliable, affordable, and part of a complete electrical system including generators, wiring, switches, and meters. Edison established his research laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey in 1876. It was the world's first industrial research laboratory, a facility dedicated to systematic invention. Edison hired skilled machinists, glassblowers, chemists, and mathematicians. He directed their work like a general commanding an army, assigning tasks, reviewing results, pushing relentlessly toward solutions. By 1878, Edison was focused on electric lighting. He secured funding from wealthy investors who believed electric light could be enormously profitable. Edison promised results within months. It was a reckless promise. The technical challenges were immense, and dozens of capable inventors had already failed. But Edison was confident. He believed the solution existed and simply needed to be found through systematic experimentation. Edison's team tested thousands of materials for filaments, metals, minerals, fibers, even human hair. Each material was formed into a thin filament, sealed in a glass bulb, connected to electricity, and tested. Most failed immediately, burning out in seconds or minutes. Some lasted hours. None lasted long enough to be commercially viable. The breakthrough came in October 1879 when Edison's team tried carbonized cotton thread. They had experimented with carbonized materials before, but this particular thread, carefully prepared, uniformly thin, and sealed in an improved vacuum, performed differently. It glowed steadily. It didn't burn out. Hour after hour, it continued glowing. When it finally failed after more than 40 hours, Edison knew he had succeeded. But success in the laboratory didn't mean success in the world. Edison needed to transform a fragile experimental bulb into a robust product that could be manufactured by the thousands. He needed to develop the entire electrical system to power those bulbs. And he needed to convince the world that electric lighting was superior to gas lighting, a challenge that would require not just technical innovation, but marketing genius. Edison understood that electric lighting needed to be a complete system, not just a component. Gas lighting worked because infrastructure already existed: pipes, valves, meters, trained installers. Electric lighting needed equivalent infrastructure. Edison set out to create it. He needed generators to produce electricity. Existing generators were designed for arc lighting and produced high voltages. Edison's incandescent bulbs required lower voltages. Around 110 volts became his standard. He designed and built generators specifically for this purpose, efficient machines that could run continuously with minimal maintenance. He needed a distribution system to deliver electricity from generators to buildings. Edison adopted direct current, DC, where electricity flows in one direction at constant voltage. DC was simple and well understood. Batteries produced DC. Most existing electrical equipment used DC. Edison's entire system would be DC-based. He needed wiring, switches, sockets, and all the components of an electrical system. Edison's team invented or improved every element. They developed insulated copper wire that could carry current safely through buildings. They designed screw-based sockets that allowed bulbs to be easily replaced. They created switches, fuses, and junction boxes. Every component was carefully engineered for safety, reliability, and ease of installation. He needed meters to measure electricity consumption so customers could be charged fairly. Edison adapted gas meter designs to create electricity meters that measured current flow. This was crucial for commercialization. Without metering, there was no way to charge customers based on usage. By 1882, Edison was ready to demonstrate his complete electrical system publicly. He selected a district in Lower Manhattan, Pearl Street, as his first installation site. The Pearl Street station would power electric lights in nearby buildings, proving that electric lighting could work at scale in real-world conditions. Construction took more than a year. Edison's team installed generators in a building on Pearl Street. They laid underground cables, more than 14 miles of copper wire encased in iron pipes, to carry electricity to customers. They wired buildings and installed light fixtures. Every detail was planned meticulously. Edison knew this demonstration had to succeed. Failure would destroy investor confidence and set electric lighting back years. On September 4, 1882, Edison threw the switch at the Pearl Street station. In buildings throughout the district, incandescent bulbs glowed to life. Newspaper offices, banks, and private residences suddenly had clean, steady electric light. The demonstration was a spectacular success. Newspapers proclaimed the dawn of a new age. Investors clamored to fund additional electrical systems. Orders for Edison's equipment poured in. But while Edison celebrated, another inventor was approaching the problem of electrical power from a completely different angle. Nikola Tesla, a Serbian engineer working in Europe, had been developing alternating current (AC) systems that would prove superior to Edison's direct current technology. The stage was set for one of the most consequential technological battles in history, the War of the Currents. Tesla arrived in America in 1884 with little money but carrying letters of recommendation to Thomas Edison. Tesla was brilliant but strange, obsessed with theoretical purity, prone to visions and mental breakdowns, utterly impractical about business matters. Edison hired him to improve DC generators and motors. Tesla worked tirelessly, often through entire nights, solving problems that had stymied Edison's other engineers. But Tesla and Edison were fundamentally incompatible. Edison was empirical, testing thousands of possibilities to find what worked. Tesla was theoretical, calculating solutions mentally before building anything. Edison believed in direct current. Tesla believed alternating current was superior. The conflict was inevitable. The conflict between Tesla and Edison came to a head in 1885. Tesla claimed Edison had promised him $50,000 if he could redesign and improve Edison's DC generators. Tesla succeeded, delivering generators that were more efficient and reliable. But when Tesla asked for payment, Edison allegedly laughed it off as a joke. "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor," Edison supposedly said. Whether this exchange actually happened remains disputed, but the relationship was destroyed. Tesla quit and struck out on his own. For a year, Tesla struggled. He dug ditches for a living while trying to interest investors in his alternating current system. AC was fundamentally different from Edison's DC. In DC systems, electricity flows in one direction at constant voltage. In AC systems, current alternates direction many times per second, and voltage rises and falls in a sine wave pattern. This seemed needlessly complicated. Why would anyone want electricity that constantly changed direction? The answer was transformers. AC voltage could be easily increased or decreased using simple transformers, coils of wire wrapped around iron cores. This was impossible with DC. High voltage meant electricity could be transmitted over long distances with minimal power loss. Low voltage meant electricity could be used safely in homes and businesses. With AC, you could generate electricity at 1 voltage, step it up to high voltage for transmission, then step it down to safe voltage for use. DC couldn't do this efficiently. Tesla's vision was a complete AC system, generators producing alternating current, transformers stepping voltage up and down, motors running on AC, and lights glowing with AC power. It was elegant, efficient, and theoretically superior to Edison's DC system. But it was also unproven and untested at scale. In 1886, Tesla found a partner. George Westinghouse, a wealthy industrialist who had made his fortune with railroad air brakes, was looking for opportunities in the emerging electrical industry. Westinghouse understood that AC had potential. He purchased Tesla's patents and hired him as a consultant. Together, they would challenge Edison's dominance. For more stories of the brilliant rivalries that electrified the modern world, subscribe to Retro Files and witness the battles that shaped our future. Edison responded with fury. His entire business was built on DC systems. He had invested millions in DC infrastructure. Cities across America were installing Edison's DC power plants. If AC proved superior, Edison's empire would collapse. He couldn't allow that to happen. What followed became known as the War of the Currents, a bitter, often vicious campaign to discredit alternating current and preserve direct current's dominance. Edison and his associates used every weapon at their disposal: scientific arguments, publicity stunts, and outright propaganda. Edison's primary argument was safety. He claimed AC was deadly while DC was safe. This was partially true. AC at high voltages was more dangerous than DC at similar voltages because alternating current could interfere with the heart's electrical signals more readily. But Edison exaggerated the danger grotesquely, conducting gruesome public demonstrations to prove his point. In 1888, Edison's associate Harold Brown began a campaign of animal electrocutions. Brown would acquire stray dogs, cats, and other animals, then publicly electrocute them using AC current while demonstrating that similar DC current was less harmful. These demonstrations were horrifying spectacles, designed to associate AC with death and DC with safety in the public mind. The campaign reached its nadir in 1890 with the electrocution of Topsy the elephant. Topsy had killed 3 men and was sentenced to death. Edison's associates arranged for Topsy to be killed using AC current, filming the execution to create a propaganda piece showing AC's lethal power. The film was widely distributed. Edison's message was clear: AC kills. Edison also lobbied New York State to adopt AC for its new electric chair, used to execute criminals. If the state chose AC for executions, it would forever associate Westinghouse's technology with death. The plan worked. New York built its electric chair using AC generators, and the first execution occurred in 1890. Newspapers referred to electrocution as being Westinghouse, exactly the association Edison wanted. But despite Edison's propaganda, AC had undeniable technical advantages. DC power plants had to be located near customers because DC couldn't be transmitted efficiently over long distances. A DC system required a power plant every mile or two in urban areas. This was expensive and inefficient. AC could be transmitted dozens of miles with acceptable power loss. A single AC power plant could serve an entire city. Westinghouse demonstrated AC's superiority in 1893 at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. The exposition needed massive amounts of electric power to illuminate buildings and power exhibits. Edison bid for the contract using DC, but demanded a high price. Westinghouse bid using AC and offered a far lower price. Westinghouse won the contract. The exposition was a triumph for AC. Hundreds of thousands of visitors saw buildings brilliantly illuminated with AC-powered lights. They saw AC motors running machinery. They saw the future, and it was powered by alternating current. Edison's DC system suddenly seemed outdated. The final blow came at Niagara Falls. In the early 1890s, engineers planned to build a hydroelectric power plant at the falls, harnessing the enormous energy of falling water to generate electricity. The question was whether to use DC or AC. Westinghouse proposed an AC system that could transmit power from Niagara Falls to Buffalo, 20 miles away. Edison couldn't offer a comparable DC solution. The distance was too great. In 1896, the Niagara Falls power plant went online, generating AC power that lit up Buffalo's streets and powered its factories. It was a stunning demonstration of AC's capability. Within a few years, AC had won the War of the Currents. Edison's DC systems were gradually phased out and replaced with AC. Westinghouse and Tesla's vision had triumphed. Edison never fully admitted defeat. He continued arguing for DC's safety and reliability. But by 1900, even Edison's own company, General Electric, had abandoned DC in favor of AC for power generation and transmission. The war was over. Tesla, meanwhile, had moved on to even more ambitious projects. He envisioned wireless transmission of electricity, global communication systems, and revolutionary motors and generators. Some of his ideas were brilliant and practical. Others were fantastical and impossible. Tesla's later life was marked by increasing eccentricity, financial struggles, and fading relevance. He died in 1943, alone and largely forgotten, in a New York hotel room. But Tesla's AC system had changed the world. By the early 20th century, electricity was becoming ubiquitous. Power plants sprang up in cities worldwide. Wires spread across landscapes, carrying electricity to factories, streetlights, and homes. The electric age had truly begun. The transformation was breathtaking. In 1882, when Edison's Pearl Street station opened, virtually no one had electric light in their homes. By 1920, electricity was common in urban areas. By 1950, it was nearly universal in developed countries. Within a single human lifetime, the world had gone from darkness to perpetual light. Electricity didn't just provide light. It powered a revolution in how people lived and worked. Electric motors replaced steam engines in factories, making manufacturing cleaner, quieter, and more efficient. Electric streetcars and trains transformed urban transportation. Electric refrigerators preserved food, changing diets and reducing disease. The electrification of homes was particularly transformative. In the 19th century, housework was exhausting physical labor. Clothes were washed by hand. Floors were swept with brooms. Food was cooked on wood or coal stoves that required constant tending. Homes were heated with fireplaces that needed wood chopped and carried. Every aspect of domestic life was labor-intensive. Electric appliances changed this. Washing machines reduced laundry from an all-day task to an hour of supervision. Vacuum cleaners cleaned floors in minutes instead of hours. Electric stoves provided instant, controllable heat without smoke or ash. Electric lighting eliminated the need to trim wicks, refill oil lamps, and light fires. Household labor declined dramatically. This had profound social consequences. As housework became less time-consuming, women, who performed most domestic labor, gained time for other pursuits. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. They pursued education, engaged in political activism, and demanded social changes. The electric age and women's liberation were intimately connected. Electricity also transformed entertainment. Electric lights made theaters, concert halls, and sports stadiums practical. Night baseball became possible. Movies, requiring bright, steady light for projection, became a mass medium. Radio broadcasting, entirely dependent on electricity, brought news and entertainment into millions of homes. By the 1930s, electric entertainment was reshaping culture and creating a mass media society. But electrification wasn't evenly distributed. Cities electrified rapidly. Rural areas remained dark for decades. In the United States, by 1930, over 90% of urban homes had electricity. Only 10% of rural homes did. Running power lines to isolated farms and small towns was expensive and unprofitable. Private utility companies saw no reason to serve rural customers. This changed with government intervention. The Rural Electrification Administration, created in 1935 as part of President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, provided loans and support for rural electric cooperatives. Farmers and rural communities banded together, forming cooperatives to build their own power lines. By 1950, electricity had reached most rural areas in America and other developed countries. The arrival of electricity in rural areas was life-changing. Farmers who had lived essentially medieval existences, reading by candlelight, pumping water by hand, preserving food in root cellars, suddenly had access to modern conveniences. Electric pumps brought water into homes. Electric lights extended working hours. Electric refrigerators preserved food. Radio connected isolated farms to the wider world. Older rural residents who experienced this transformation never forgot it. They remembered the exact day electricity arrived. They remembered the first time they flipped a switch and light flooded their homes. They remembered gathering around the first radio, hearing voices from distant cities. These memories carried profound emotional weight because they marked the boundary between two different worlds, one defined by darkness and physical limitation, the other by light and unprecedented possibility. By mid-century, electricity had become so fundamental that life without it seemed impossible. Cities depended on electric pumps for water, electric refrigeration for food, electric signals for transportation. Hospitals required electricity for life support equipment. Communication systems ran on electricity. When power failed, even briefly, modern life ground to a halt. This dependency created vulnerabilities. The Northeast blackout of 1965 plunged 30 million people into darkness when a single relay failed, cascading through interconnected power grids. The blackout lasted hours in some areas, days in others. It revealed how fragile the electrical infrastructure was and how dependent society had become on continuous power. But despite occasional failures, the electrical system proved remarkably reliable. Power plants generated electricity continuously. Transmission lines carried it hundreds of miles. Substations stepped voltage down for safe use. The system operated with 99.9% reliability, a stunning achievement for such complex infrastructure. By the 1930s, electricity had become so commonplace in cities that a generation had grown up never knowing life without it. Flipping a switch to produce light seemed as natural as opening a faucet for water. The infrastructure that made this possible, power plants, transmission lines, transformers, meters, was invisible to most users. Electricity was simply there, reliable and endless, a utility as fundamental as air. But this convenience obscured how recent the transformation had been. People in their 50s in 1930 could remember childhoods lit by candles and gas lamps. They had witnessed the arrival of electricity and experienced its impact firsthand. The world of their youth, dark after sunset, quiet, constrained by daylight hours, seemed impossibly distant. Electricity had compressed decades of change into a single generation. Rural America remained largely without electricity into the 1930s. Only about 10% of farms had electrical service in 1930. Cities were thoroughly electrified, but farms and small towns were too scattered to justify private investment in electrical infrastructure. Power companies calculated profit per mile of transmission line. Urban areas had enough customers per mile to make installation profitable. Rural areas didn't. This created a widening gap between urban and rural life. City dwellers enjoyed electric lighting, refrigerators, washing machines, and countless other electric appliances that reduced drudgery and improved comfort. Farm families still used kerosene lamps, ice boxes, and hand-powered equipment. Young people fled farms for cities, drawn partly by electrical conveniences unavailable in rural areas. Rural electrification became not just an economic issue, but a matter of preserving rural communities. The federal government intervened through the Rural Electrification Administration, created in 1935 as part of the New Deal. The REA provided loans to cooperatives formed by rural residents to build their own electrical systems. Farmers organized, borrowed money, and strung power lines themselves, sometimes using volunteer labor to reduce costs. The program transformed rural America. By 1950, more than 90% of farms had electricity. The gap between urban and rural life narrowed dramatically. For more forgotten stories of how innovation reached every corner of human life, subscribe to Retro Files and explore the moments that electrified civilization. Electricity's spread brought appliances that reshaped domestic life. The electric refrigerator, commercially viable by the 1920s, eliminated the need for daily ice deliveries and allowed food to be stored safely for longer periods. Diets improved. Food waste decreased. Shopping could happen less frequently. The rhythm of household management changed fundamentally. Washing machines transformed laundry from an exhausting, day-long ordeal into a task requiring minimal physical effort. Before washing machines, cleaning clothes meant hauling and heating water, scrubbing by hand, wringing out heavy, wet fabric, and hanging everything to dry. A farm wife might spend an entire day doing laundry. Electric washing machines reduced this to a few hours of work, much of it simply loading, unloading, and hanging clothes while the machine did the heavy labor. Vacuum cleaners replaced brooms and carpet beaters, making cleaning faster and more effective. Electric irons replaced irons heated on stoves, providing consistent temperature and eliminating the need to continually reheat. Electric stoves replaced wood and coal stoves, providing precise temperature control and eliminating the need to maintain fires. Each appliance was individually modest, but collectively, they revolutionized household labor. These changes primarily affected women, who performed most domestic labor. Electric appliances promised liberation from drudgery. Advertisements depicted smiling housewives with ample free time, rescued from exhausting physical labor by modern conveniences. The reality was more complex. Standards of cleanliness increased. Homes were expected to be cleaner, clothes washed more frequently, meals more elaborate. The time saved by appliances was often consumed by higher expectations. But electric appliances did provide genuine benefits. Physical exhaustion decreased. Women's health improved. And electrical conveniences enabled some women to work outside the home, contributing to family income or pursuing careers, changes that would accelerate in later decades. Electric lighting also transformed entertainment and culture. Radio emerged in the 1920s, bringing music, news, and drama into homes. Radio required electricity and helped drive residential electrification. Families gathered around radios in the evening, sharing entertainment and information that previous generations couldn't access. Movie theaters, already popular, became more spectacular with electric lighting and air conditioning. The movie-going experience, entering a dark, cool theater to watch stories unfold on a huge screen, was only possible because of electricity. Hollywood's golden age in the 1930s and 1940s coincided with widespread electrification, and the two developments reinforced each other. Movies celebrated modern life, including electrical conveniences, encouraging audiences to embrace technology. Electric signs and billboards transformed urban nighttime environments. Broadway's bright lights, Times Square's dazzling advertisements, Las Vegas's neon extravagance, all were made possible by electric light. Cities became visual spectacles, especially at night. The darkness that had once made cities dangerous and quiet now disappeared in a blaze. But electricity also created new problems. Power consumption increased continuously, requiring ever larger power plants and more extensive transmission networks. Most electricity came from burning coal, producing air pollution and environmental damage. Hydroelectric dams, while cleaner, disrupted rivers and ecosystems. The environmental costs of electrification were rarely considered in the early decades. Electricity seemed like pure progress, its benefits so obvious that questioning its expansion seemed absurd. Electricity also created vulnerability. As societies became dependent on electrical power, outages became crises. A power failure might mean darkness, yes, but also non-functioning refrigerators, dead communication systems, disabled water pumps, and paralyzed transportation. The more society relied on electricity, the more catastrophic its absence became. This dependency was a hidden cost of electrification, convenience traded for resilience. The electric grid itself became critical infrastructure, requiring constant maintenance and expansion. Power plants needed fuel. Transmission lines needed repair. Generators needed replacement. The system was complex, interconnected, and vulnerable to failures that could cascade across entire regions. The Great Northeast Blackout of 1965, which left 30 million people without power for up to 13 hours, demonstrated this vulnerability dramatically. Modern life depended on electricity, and electricity depended on systems that were impressive but fragile. World War II demonstrated electricity's strategic importance. Industrial production for the war effort required enormous amounts of electrical power. Aluminum for aircraft, steel for ships and tanks, explosives, electronics, all required electricity for manufacturing. The Manhattan Project, developing atomic weapons, consumed vast amounts of electricity for uranium enrichment. Nations with robust electrical systems could produce more weapons and sustain larger military efforts. Electricity was not just a convenience, but a weapon of war. After the war, electrification accelerated globally. Europe, devastated by war, rebuilt with modern electrical systems. Japan, occupied and restructured, adopted American-style electrification rapidly. Developing nations pursued electrification as a path to modernization. Electricity became a marker of development. Nations with widespread electrical access were advanced. Those without were backward. By the 1960s and 1970s, electricity had become invisible in developed nations. It was always present, always available, always reliable. Children growing up in this era never experienced sustained absence of electricity. Power outages were rare and brief. The idea of living without electricity seemed as absurd as living without running water or heat. Electricity wasn't just a technology, it was a foundation of civilization, as essential as food or shelter. This invisibility was electricity's ultimate triumph and its greatest risk. Because electricity was always there, people stopped thinking about where it came from, how it was generated, or what it required. They simply consumed it, expecting infinite supply at constant prices. The complex infrastructure supporting this consumption, power plants burning fossil fuels, transmission lines spanning continents, maintenance crews working constantly, disappeared from public consciousness. Electricity also changed human relationship with natural time. Before electric lighting, human activity synchronized with daylight. People woke at dawn, worked during the day, and slept after dark. Seasonal variations in daylight hours shaped the rhythm of life. Longer days in summer, shorter days in winter. But electric light severed this connection. Work could happen at any hour. Entertainment was available anytime. Sleep schedules became detached from natural cycles. This created gains and losses. The gains were obvious: freedom from natural constraints, ability to work or play regardless of time or season, liberation from the tyranny of darkness. The losses were subtler: disruption of circadian rhythms, sleep disorders, disconnection from natural cycles, constant availability, and the erosion of rest. Modern research has shown that electric lighting, especially the blue spectrum light from LED screens, disrupts human biology. Melatonin production decreases. Sleep quality suffers. Health effects accumulate. Humans evolved over millions of years in environments where darkness followed light in predictable cycles. A century of electric lighting hasn't changed that biology. The convenience of artificial light came with biological costs that were invisible for decades. Electricity also enabled the digital revolution. Computers, the internet, smartphones, all run on electricity. The information age is fundamentally an electric age. Every email sent, every video streamed, every online transaction requires electricity. Data centers consume enormous amounts of power. The digital world that seems weightless and immaterial is actually grounded in physical infrastructure consuming vast energy. This raises questions about sustainability. Global electricity consumption has increased exponentially since the 1950s. Most electricity still comes from burning fossil fuels, contributing to climate change. Renewable sources like solar and wind are growing but remain a fraction of total supply. The world built on electricity faces the challenge of transforming how that electricity is generated without disrupting the systems depending on it. Looking back from the 21st century, the transformation electricity brought seems almost miraculous. In 1870, the world was dark after sunset, powered by muscle and fire, constrained by natural limits. By 1970, the developed world glowed 24 hours a day, powered by invisible electricity, largely freed from natural constraints. The change happened within a single lifetime, yet it felt like evolution across centuries. Thomas Edison died in 1931. When news of his death spread, some proposed dimming lights across America for 1 minute in tribute, similar to the tribute paid to Alexander Graham Bell. But the idea was rejected as impractical. Dimming power would disrupt countless electrical systems, cause accidents, and inconvenience millions. Edison's invention had become too essential to stop, even briefly. Electricity could not be turned off without crisis. Nikola Tesla died in 1943, alone in a New York hotel room, impoverished and largely forgotten despite his crucial contributions to the electrical revolution. Tesla's AC system powered the world, but Tesla himself received little credit and less reward. He spent his final years feeding pigeons and pursuing increasingly eccentric ideas, a brilliant mind disconnected from the practical world. The contrast between Edison and Tesla is instructive. Edison was the practical inventor, focused on commercialization and profit. He built companies, accumulated wealth, and died famous and respected. Tesla was the theoretical genius, focused on pure innovation and elegant solutions. He gave away fortunes, pursued impractical dreams, and died poor and obscure. Both were essential to the electrical revolution, but only one thrived in the world that revolution created. The machine that brought light to the world was not just a light bulb or a generator. It was an entire system: generation, transmission, distribution, consumption, that transformed civilization. That system emerged from the work of thousands of inventors, engineers, and workers, but it began with a handful of men obsessed with harnessing electricity to defeat darkness. They succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined. The light they created didn't just illuminate rooms, it illuminated possibilities. It extended time. It enhanced productivity. It improved safety, health, and comfort. It enabled technologies that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. Electric light was the foundation on which the modern world was built, but they also created dependencies and vulnerabilities that weren't obvious at the time. Societies addicted to electricity face existential threats if that electricity fails. Environmental damage from power generation creates long-term costs that offset short-term benefits. And the disconnection from natural rhythms imposes biological costs that are only beginning to be understood. The glowing filament in Edison's bulb that October night in 1879 represented a threshold. Behind it was the world of fire and darkness, where night meant sleep and winter meant cold, where human activity followed natural cycles and life was limited by physical constraints. Ahead was the world of endless light and limitless energy, where time became flexible and space became conditional, where human activity could ignore natural limits. We crossed that threshold and never looked back. The world of darkness is gone, remembered only by the very old or reconstructed as nostalgia. We live in the world Edison and Tesla created: bright, electric, always on. We take light for granted because we've never known anything else. But on clear nights, away from cities, you can still see what the world was like before electricity. The sky fills with stars, visible in their millions because there's no competing light. The darkness is profound, absolute, a presence rather than an absence. And in that darkness, you can sense what humanity lost when it gained the light: a connection to natural cycles, an acceptance of limits, a comfort with darkness as well as light. The machine that brought light to the world changed everything. It freed humanity from darkness, but made us dependent on light. It extended our capabilities, but narrowed our experience. It was progress, undeniably, but progress always has a price. We paid it gladly because we wanted the light. And once we had it,